Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my fine friends. Welcome to the 4th episode of Season 10 of the Tom Petty Project podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Brown. This is the weekly podcast that digs into the entire Tom Petty catalogue song by song, album by album, and includes conversations with musicians, fans, and people connected with Tom along the way. Last week, we talked about the brilliantly reflective Time to Move On, and a few of you left very nice comments on social media for me. So over on Facebook, longtime listener Carol Rosenberg-Shapiro responded, "Everything you and Janet Lavelle discussed was spot on, especially how the change to the second half of his career. As a fan, I felt the transition, but only now can look back and think first half, second half." And I've become far more acutely aware of that split in Tom's career the further I've travelled into the discography. You know, every artist has phases of their career, and there are other markers in Tom's. Down the Torpedoes, Southern Accents, and the Travelling Wilburys being major ones. But that shift that happens around Into the Great Wide Open and Wildflowers is, for me, much more significant than any of the others. If Into the Great Wide Open was Tom's Rubber Soul, then Wildflowers is definitely his Revolver. My pal Pete Nestor from the Honest and Unmerciful Record Review podcast says this: "Great point you make comparing this track to the seemingly simple but deceptively multifaceted Wildflowers. The way this song two steps along, it's like a perfectly executed celestial dance with the vocal phrasing and delivery, rhythm guitar, liquid lead guitar runs, and piano, seemingly each occurring in their own orbit, are all rotating around Steve Ferrone's steady North Star. This one grows richer with each listen." And man, I love it when people write far more eloquently than I ever could, and that idea of each of the parts rotating around Steve Ferrone's steady North Star is a sublime way to put it, Pete. I love it. JP Kaufman comments, "One of my faves. The feel, the poetry, nothing quite like it, and yet quintessential Petty. I'm downloading the last few and will catch up on the 8 hours at sea, offline, from Alaska to Japan." So hopefully, JP, your trip over to Japan was smooth sailing, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. The wonderful Mary Beth Donnelly said this: "Great episode as always." Thank you, Mary Beth. "I love this song. I sing it to myself at least several times a week. No question, but it's a 10 for me. It's amazing how Tom was so good at taking these little idiomatic phrases someone probably said to him, like 'don't do me like that,' 'time to move on,' 'wake up time,' and instead of the phrase sounding cliched, he made them sound unique yet universal. Such a gift, really, to make the seemingly simple so damn profound. My favorite line, getting the words wrong, wasting the meaning, and losing the rhyme. If Tom could feel that way, even enough to write that line, then I can forgive myself for those times I feel tongue-tied. Just a little brilliant self-deprecation." And I do like that observation about Tom being able to take idiomatic phrases and use them effectively. Like all good writers, I'm sure his notebook was filled with hundreds, if not thousands, of similar phrases and ideas that were never used because he couldn't find exactly the right home for them within a song. But when he did lean into a certain phrase, he always seemed to find exactly the right angle to approach it from. Jill Lucas wraps up Facebook with the following: "Great episode again, Kevin." Thank you, Jill. "You're absolutely right about Tom having an effect like no one else. He was just so special. His effect on me is sometimes overwhelming and I have to take a break. Then I come back and it hits me like a ton of bricks. Weird, isn't it?" And honestly, Jill, I don't think it's weird at all. You know, there are many songs by many artists that can overwhelm me if I'm not ready for them. So hey, I was cleaning out my garage and organizing stuff in the garage yesterday with my wife and was listening to Tom Petty. I had my playlist on. And when Room at the Top came on, I wasn't ready for it. And I immediately choked up. Now, thankfully, I was up a ladder at the time, and I had a moment to compose myself, but that opening chord and lyric in Room at the Top took my breath away. It's the power that great music has, and thank goodness for it. Over on Twitter, my Manchester United brother-in-arms, Steve Ursel, posts a good episode on another great song. Thanks, Steve. "There's an air of uneasiness to this track because looking ahead into the unknown is scary, but there is also excitement in the possibilities it offers. There's trepidation, but a determination to face the future positively." I'd commented back that these are all fantastic adjectives to use, and perhaps they're tied together by the word resolve. Conversely, Viola commented, "It's really a beautiful, shiny song, but the feeling of saying a final goodbye to someone always drives me to tears when I hear it. Never quite sure if I get the meaning of lyrics right, to be honest. Sorry." And there's no need at all to apologize. I love words and language, but I find Shakespeare utterly impenetrable. To paraphrase a song we'll be covering in a future season, take what you can and leave the rest behind. Over on Instagram, at CouplesRob commented, "Agree with Kevin, this song applies to so many life changes. I remember it randomly playing as I was pulling out of the parking lot of a job I quit. I love how Tom applied so many of his life circumstances from a female perspective, it makes it more universal and relatable. Too Good to Be True is another example of this. And it's another good observation that Tom seemed to be able to put himself into unfamiliar shoes so that they fit more like a well-worn pair of runners than a glass slipper. Look, I'm just trying to keep up with Pete's stellar analogy game here. And to finish up, Lisa Kelly Pennington and I are in simpatico. She writes 3-0. I love this one because it is so applicable to so many situations. And again, I'm not a music person, but while this certainly can cover a number of sad situations, I don't feel like the song is inherently sad or a downer. And as I think I might have mentioned or alluded to during the episode, I don't think that Time to Move On is an exclusively sad or morose song. It's just self-reflective and honest. So those different elements of why it's time to move on are where that broad appeal and universality come so strongly into play. Okay, well, that's all our social media wrapped up. Thanks for all your comments as usual. Let's get back to today's song and discuss the first all-out rocker on Wildflowers, the powerhouse, You Wreck Me. In the liner notes for Wildflowers and All the Rest, journalist Jan Uhelski writes, while in name, Wildflowers is a solo album, this track is a pure Heartbreakers garage rave-up, setting it apart from most of the acoustic-based songs on the album. And this is, sequentially, if not necessarily chronologically, the first song on the album that features the entire band operating as a five-piece. You know, with Howie Epstein taking over bass duties that had previously been assumed by Tom and Mike on the first three tracks. One of two songs on the album co-written with Mike Campbell, it was born out of a riff written by the Heartbreakers' trusty lead guitarist. And in conversations with Tom Petty, author Paul Zolo asks, did you change that much from Mike's original conception? And Tom responds, no, not at all, really. I think he had completely mapped out the chords in the arrangement. I just had to find a tune and lyrics for it. Oh, just that. Only that, Tom. The song was selected as the second single from the album, peaking at number 2 on the US rock chart, whilst inexplicably failing to chart on the Billboard Hot 100. A live staple, You Wreck Me was the most played song from Wildflowers, and first played live on Late Night with Letterman on November 21st, 1994, and last played during Tom's last ever performance at the Hollywood Bowl in 2017. I'll put a link to the version from the Fillmore release in the episode notes, as I think that one really captures the energy and fun of this track in a live setting. The song's played with a capo on the first fret to make it actually an F instead of E, even though the chords played are D, A, E. So, you know what, we'll refer to D, A, and E for simplicity's sake. Otherwise, I might end up saying sharp a hell of a lot in this episode. As soon as those three descending chords come in on guitar, with Howie Epstein matching them on bass, you know you're in for a rocker. Steve Ferrone intros the tempo on the hats before that whip-crack snare hits on the fourth beat of the fourth bar and the drums come in fully. And I'm going to have to rave a little about Ferrone again here. That very slight swing he puts into those eighth notes on the hats, just by alternating the velocity he hits them at, is just sublime. And it's tight and consistent too. You know, he plays with the amount of choke he's giving those hats, and the result is this fantastic propulsive beat that drives the song forward every bit as much as that spectacular riff. Legendary Nashville songwriter Harlan Howard is purported to have coined the expression 3 chords and the truth. And, you know, Heartbreaker's friend and colleague Bob Dylan is also remembered for the great line, all I need is my red guitar, 3 chords and the truth. Well, that's all this riff is. 3 chords. No passing chords, no fancy inversions or suspended notes, just 3 chords. D, A, E. And I've probably talked about this before, but it always amazes me when someone can write a riff like that that's never been done in exactly that way, you know, with that tone, tempo, and feel, but just using those 3 chords. So we get the genius of Mike Campbell and the genius of Steve Ferrone within the opening 8 bars. So how do we complement this genius? How about with another dynamite Tom Petty opening lyric for a start? Tonight we ride, right or wrong, tonight we sail on a radio song. Where we've had doubt, optimism, longing, and a little bit of despair on the opening 3 songs in different flavors, the mood here is one of utter self-assurance, bordering on defiance. And the point of view is just right. Tonight we ride, not tonight I ride. Despite that self-assurance, the key to this song is also that it's inclusive, rather than using the idea of a lone wolf. The push and pull between this assurance and reliance on another person makes this song a partnership. And the way it opens, it has the cinematic, reckless abandon of a Thelma and Louise or a Bonnie and Clyde. It's, you know, it's just you and me against the world. The other way that Tom brilliantly constructs these verses is not to sing over that main riff. D-A-E, Tonight We Ride. D-A-E, right or wrong. D-A-E, Tonight We Sail. D-A-E, on a radio song. The second half of the verse then changes key to G-D-A for 4 bars before going back to that main progression. And during this section, the guitars are played much more subdued and muted to let those vocals come through. So 3 chords, a backbeat, and a confident lyric. Simple as pie. And just as sweet. Sweeter than, say, even the best cake. Hey, that's a little Easter egg for anyone who listens to my Queen podcast. After this verse, we get that fantastic pre-chorus. Oh, yeah, over the G and A chords. And in this short build into the chorus, we also have Tom's lead vocal being doubled to give it a little more heft. The chorus then really pushes the song over the cliff in every way. You wreck me, baby. Yeah, you break me in two. Yeah, you move me, honey. Yes, you do. Wow. That title lyric was, famously among Pettyheads, originally, You Rock Me. But as Tom tells Paul Zolo, I never thought I'd use it because you wouldn't use that. But I had to scan something for the melody, so I had You Rock Me, Baby. And really, anyone or their dog could write You Rock Me, Baby. In fact, I'm sure that line has graced the lyric sheets of many an 80s and 90s hair metal band, so it's easy to see why Tom simply wasn't happy with it. In fact, none of the band was enamored of it, Benmont Tench saying, You Rock Me is a shitty title. It's just lame and trite, but You Wreck Me says the same thing, but says it in a different, more intense way. Another critic of the chorus was co-producer Rick Rubin, who says that he thought, Yes, you do, the ending line, is to be a throwaway, only for Tom to emphatically ask, Are you crazy? That's the best line in the song. Now, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it's the best line in the song, but I do think it's an important cap to that chorus. As usual, Benmont Tench said it best by calling You Wreck Me more intense than You Rock Me. You Rock Me has all sorts of positive connotations and can be viewed through myriad different lenses, but You Wreck Me is absolute and final. It basically means that you reduce me to my base parts just by being you. And even though wreck in its literal sense means destruction, in the slang way that Tom is employing it, it's the most positive statement imaginable. So when Mike Campbell remembers Tom saying, I don't like the chorus yet, I'm going to change it, you can see why that was absolutely the right decision. And so coming back to Yes, you do, that's the underscore underneath the rest of these sentences in the chorus. And I think, as Tom said, it's absolutely not the best line, but a very, very important line in the song. And don't get me wrong, had the song been You Rock Me, on top of those chords and that beat, it would still have been a barn burner, but it wouldn't have been a classic, which I'll contend this song is. Tom tells author Paul Zolo, we really held off for a long time and didn't record the song until very late in the album because I didn't think I had the line. So that one word stopped the song from working in the minds of Tom and the rest of the band because they instinctively knew it wasn't strong enough. Tom goes on to say, it was so obvious to change rock to wreck and the whole thing made sense because I really wrote every other word. I don't know why it took me that long. Suddenly a light bulb went off and I went, oh, it's wreck. So this is a superb example of patience and trust that the right line will come. The fact that this album was pored over and agonized over proved that a meticulous approach to songcraft is just as valid as a spontaneous one. And I think my pal Pete Nestor said somewhere on social media something similar, that this crafting of songs, moving pieces around, taking parts from here and using them there until the songs were at their best, typifies the approach of making this masterpiece. So we have this inspired piece of lyrical brilliance that took its time revealing itself. To make it all the better, we have some of the most densely laid vocals in the Heartbreakers catalogue. I'd love to know how many parts there actually are here. At a guess, I'd say Tom's lead vocal is left alone. Then both he and Howie are singing one harmony part both doubled, with Howie possibly adding a second slightly different harmony. I think it might just be an octave lower. I can almost, there's got that sort of bass texture to it that I don't know. It's hard to tell. But I think there are probably 5 or 6 vocal tracks at least on that chorus section, other than on the last line. So it's hard to pull that apart. But you know what? If I ever get a chance to speak to someone who's in the room, I'll definitely be asking about this one. It's such a rousing chorus because of that sublime marriage of words and melody. And again, it works as a response to the call of the riff. If Tom Petty ever wrote a better chorus, I'd love someone to tell me what it is. As good? Sure. Probably. Yeah, maybe. But better? I don't know how you top this one in a rock and roll paradigm. The song transitions from the chorus to the second verse with absolutely no fanfare. No fill, not a 1 or 2 bar instrumental bridge, just that drop back out to the more muted guitars. When you listen to how the guitars are playing off each other here, we get that reminder of why Tom and Mike were perfect bandmates. Tom is simply playing those 3 chords and letting them ring. They're just open chords, no adornment. 1 downstrum for each. Then Mike is doing the color commentary in the background by adding those little chugga-chuggers, which are mixed further into the left channel. It's what I've come to recognize as the true magic of the Heartbreakers as a band, knowing unerringly when and how to complement and accentuate what another band member is doing without ever treading on their toes or stifling what they're playing. To further make that point, Benmont Tench joins proceedings in the second verse on the key change by matching that D-A-E on the piano. And I'm pretty sure he's just playing power fifths in the middle of the keyboard, and it's not mixed front and center, but it just adds that build in the song that keeps it moving ever onward. It kind of reminds me of the cross-country running sequence in Forrest Gump. You don't immediately notice that his posse of fellow runners is growing slowly, but when you look up, there's a small crowd behind him rather than just 1 or 2 curious onlookers. The song moves back to the chorus and then out into the bridge, and here the song changes key again. Twice, before Mike Campbell plows frenetically into his solo. Through this section, the guitars are again playing off one another with the right channel playing that up, down, down pattern, and the left channel actually sitting on 1 chord in counterpoint. Benmont's also building this frenzy by adding in that piano again, and I think a little organ mixed down loaded just to keep it out of the way, but to have it there. The solo itself is a searing Chuck Berry-inspired string benderama. It's pure 50s and 60s rock and roll fed through a dirty, distorted tone. And it's a fairly simple part again, but Mike wrings every single ounce of feeling and emotion out of every note. And though that solo is a ripper because of its simplicity, it's the ending that always gets to me. It's the way he drops down the neck and lands back on that root E exactly as the riff kicks in again. It's just exceptional soloing. And I'd be willing to bet that he just played that and didn't overthink it. Have I mentioned on this podcast before that Mike Campbell is a genius? Maybe. I think I might have mentioned it already in this episode, actually. Well, if I haven't, Mike Campbell, he's a genius. Okay, folks, it's that time once again for a little petty trivia. Your question from last week was this: which is the longest song on the Wildflowers album? Is it A, Wake Up Time? B, It's Good to Be King? C, Crawling Back to You? Or D, House in the Woods? Well, first of all 4 of these songs are over 5 minutes, and this makes it the first of Tom's albums to feature 4 songs of this length. The shortest of the 4, coming in at 5 minutes and 5 seconds, is Crawling Back to You. Next up, 5 seconds longer, is the track we'll be covering next week, It's Good to Be King. 9 seconds longer still, at 5:19, it's Wake Up Time, which means that House in the Woods takes the crown, coming in slightly over 5.5 minutes at 5:32. Your question for this week is this: on which of the following albums does Benmont Tench not feature? So which album is Benmont Tench not on? Is it A, Looking East by Jackson Browne? B, The Missing Years by John Prine? C, Highway Companion by Tom Petty? Or D, Hackney Diamonds by the Rolling Stones? Okay, back to the song. After the solo, the groove gets really tasty. The main riff is led by the bass guitar and the piano, with one muted guitar chugging some of the notes of the riff, and the other adding in those quintessential Mike Campbell flavors to the overall soup. Hey, Campbell's soup. I swear that was accidental, but I'm not mad about it. And to make this even better than all the other awesome things that have come before it, we get one of my favorite Tom Petty lyrics. I'll be the boy in the corduroy pants, you be the girl at the high school dance. Run with me wherever I go, and just play dumb, whatever you know. Man, that's good. The first part of the verse is so evocative and has a gentleness to it that contrasts with the directness of the rest of the lyrics. It's almost a moment of wistfulness on the part of the song's central character in remembering how he's ended up in his current position. And the second half, just play dumb, whatever you know. In other words, just go with it. I know sometimes that you may be right and I may be wrong. We could show our hand or we could play our cards close to our chest. Just don't let on that you know different or better. The pairing of those two lines for me is perfection. It sets up that brief, idyllic snapshot of yesterday before effortlessly tying it back to today. The song finishes with 2 repetitions of the chorus, then 8 bars of that up-down alternating pattern, and a big open E chord to finish, accompanied by a tambourine, I believe played by Phil Jones, who is credited with percussion on this track. And as a last note, I'd never seen the video until I sat down to write the notes for this episode, and I got to say, I love it. I don't always love performance videos. I got to say that I do like Tom when he gets creative and they sort of have narratives or they have sort of different elements. But as a performance video, I love this one. Primarily because I love watching Steve Ferroni smile. And he's got a big grin on his face. He's got that backwards ball cap, and everyone just looks super cool. So if you haven't seen the video for it, I've left that in the episode notes also. For today's episode, I chatted to writer, songwriter, and all-round authentic rock and roller Jeff Slate, who, like last week's guest, first appeared on the show all the way back in season 4. Make sure you go back and listen to our catch-up from last season, which was right at the end of season 9. When we were talking about Jeff's now released record, which you should all definitely be checking out and buying. We recorded this piece for today's episode at the same time as we had that conversation, and it was a joy to dive into a specific song with Jeff. This is our conversation about You Wreck Me. So what are your thoughts on Wildflowers generally? Because when we spoke the first time and I asked you my 10 questions, I'm 95% sure that Wildflowers was not the album you picked as your go-to Tom Petty album. I can't remember what it was, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't Wildflowers.
It's a good question what my go-to. That catalog is so broad. It would be dependent on my mood, but let's deal with the question at hand. I love Wildflowers. And I particularly love the box set and all the extra stuff that we've gotten and the alternate versions. And you can kind of make your own version of Wildflowers now, which is pretty cool. But what's the question specifically? There was a lot in there.
Yeah, sorry, I'm a very, very bad interviewer today. Wildflowers was the album that really flipped me from being, Tom Petty's good artist. Like, he's written some good albums to, actually, this guy, I really need to really pay attention to Tom Petty because there's a lot more going on in this album than was on anything else that came before it. Just sort of thematically, the consistency of it, the way it's produced, every single part of that record to me is essentially perfect.
I think what was amazing, I mean, I remember I was sitting literally in this spot. I had my sound system over there. It was much bigger back in those days.
Yeah.
And it was a warm fall day. I got it, release day, and I put it on CD. Had a really high quality setup. And sonically, right from the very beginning, it knocked me in.
Yeah.
It was just unbelievably well recorded. And, it was also, we were talking about in our other interview about Be Here Now by Oasis, it didn't have that crunchy, full-on, squished sound. It was very open and warm and round and all the things that you want. It was as close at that point, 94, as close to vinyl as you were getting on CD. It just sounded beautiful. And I also remember that it was quite long, but didn't feel long, right?
Yeah.
And the songs that went on a little bit long, felt like they were appropriate, that they went somewhere rather than just noodled. So those are pretty great. But Wildflowers is such an amazing point. So we had gotten, you got to remember that, so 85, 86, which is around the time of Southern Accent, I went to see Tom and the Heartbreakers with Bob Dylan. It's the first time I had seen either of them. And when the tickets went on sale, I couldn't, I was in exams or something. I couldn't get tickets, so I had to scalp them. And it was over summer break, but I could not get anybody to go with me. Because first of all, Bob was a little bit like, in that moment, he was on MTV, but it was a little like, people knew could be hit and miss. I think that was his reputation. And Tom, I think, was just not at a moment where everybody was like, oh my God, Tom Petty. Now, as diehards, we don't relate to that,
Yeah.
but I could not get anybody to go to me. So I scalped the ticket, and the guy who sat next to me, it turned out the last time he'd seen Dylan had been with the band. And he told me stories all night, which was amazing in and of itself. But it was my first glimpse of the Heartbreakers. And I was like, oh my God, this is like the greatest band in the world, because they could do everything. They were backing up Bob. They were doing their own stuff. They did an extended jam. They did the set list they chose too. It wasn't like greatest hits. It was weird. They did I don't know if they did Heartbreakers Beach Party, but I'm trying to remember what was it they did. Anyway, people can look it up online, but it wasn't the obvious, all the obvious songs. But I fell in love with them. And then I started to go see them regularly. And in that time period, we then got Full Moon Fever and the first Wilburys record, and then Into the Great Wide Open, then the second Wilburys record, and then the greatest hit, which had Mary Jane on it, right? Okay,
Yeah.
so in that period, it was like everything was gold,
Yeah.
and he had become someone who was not just another artist I wanted to go see when he came to town. He was in that upper echelon, that sort of, A-level tier of rock stars that everybody wanted.
Yeah.
Everything had changed. So I think the weird thing about Wildflowers was my expectation was very high.
Right.
I wasn't sure about the Rick Rubin connection. I mean, I knew Rick tangentially when he was here in New York City with the Beasties, and so I knew the Beasties a little bit. So I didn't understand how that worked because he hadn't really broken out as a producer yet.
Yeah.
But like I said, I remember coming in here, putting on the record, and just being like completely enveloped by the sound of the record, and just the storytelling, and his voice. His voice was dry up front, and just it was just everything was crafted to perfection. So I don't know if I said that it wasn't my go-to record. I can't imagine. I guess, whatever day you caught me on, I might have been listening to something else.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I always like to be contrary. It's going to be Mojo or Highway Companion or something. But You Wreck Me is a perfect rock and roll song.
Yeah.
I think the thing about, the story about how it was You Rock Me,
Yeah.
which is, I gotta say, it is silly and trite, but if Tom had sang it, it would have been fine.
Especially over that riff, no one would have batted an eyelid, right?
Right? I mean, it actually would have felt to me like ironic, because Tom and Dylan, they're funny. They have a sense of humor.
Yeah.
But I get it. If you're Tom, you want to be comfortable. You've got to sing that his whole life. So he wants to be comfortable with it. But the shift from You Rock Me to You Wreck Me as a songwriter, like, it's almost impossible to think of replacing rock with wreck. It seems so obvious, but like if you were sitting with a pad of paper and trying to think of a word to replace rock, wreck would not be it.
Yeah.
It just would not, and yet it's like it changes the song into something that would have been ironic and maybe a B-side into like this whole other thing that everybody gets. And I don't know why we get it. I can't even tell you what it means. It doesn't even matter. But I think the just having heard, there's the kind of acoustic version and whatever on the box set. There's, they were trying to find the song, but the story is that they, Ferroni showed up on the first day and they were going to try him out, and he hadn't heard the song, and they went in there and, they counted it off, and that's what they played.
Yeah.
Those stories are always hard to believe. It seems true.
Yeah.
Because those are guys who can do that, on the fly with, maybe there was a little bit of editing after the fact, but maybe not. I just don't know. But there are moments in rock and roll, and by 1994, rock and roll was kind of the end of rock and roll as a sort of real force in the culture.
Yeah.
I
On the
kind of,
commercial side, certainly as well. Yeah.
yeah, that was sort of the tail end. But there are records that have existed throughout rock and roll history, sort of beginning with maybe Rocket 88, but certainly Wap Bada Loom Wap Bum Boom, Little Richard.
Yeah.
Um, it's 100% in line with any of them.
Yeah.
Twist and Shout, the Beatles reworking of the Isley Brothers, Hey Joe by Jimmy, whatever it is, there are these, or maybe Purple Haze is a better example, Can't Explain by the Who or My Generation, these songs that are just like perfect 3.5 minute songs that, both say everything you want them to, and also a big F you to your parents and the
Yeah.
world at large.
Yeah.
Right. And so I think in the middle of all these very thoughtful, beautiful songs about love and loss and relationships and, mortality and, heavy things
Yeah.
for a youngish guy to be writing about in 1994, which nobody was really writing about until at least a few years later at that level of rock and roll stardom. Here comes this song, You
Yeah.
Wrecked Me. And I will say too, that when, I've had the fortune of playing with many, many, many times, but I played it with Ron and Steve Ferroni. And, it's just a fun, fun, fun song to play.
Yeah.
Everybody on the stage as well as off the stage enjoys it.
Yeah. It's
You
funny
know?
that thing, hey, but I don't think people, if you listen to music, I don't know if you necessarily get that as a musician, there are some songs that you just light up when you play them because they are just fun. And it's not even that the song sometimes doesn't have to be the best song ever written, but it's like Louie Louie. Like you can play
Yeah.
those three chords over and over
Well,
for hours, right?
that's a perfect example because like when you play, here's a good example. When you play for instance, Refugee,
Yeah.
you feel it's very hard to make it your own, and you feel a pressure for it to sound like Refugee.
Yeah.
Because it's such a signature sound. It's not just the words and the music, it's the whole record itself,
Yeah.
right? Whereas if you're playing Can't Explain or Twist and Shout or, Tutti Frutti or, whatever, or You Wreck Me, you almost can't go wrong. You
Yeah.
could be kids in a garage and it's going to sound like You Wreck Me,
Yeah.
right? And everybody, whether you're in the audience or on the stage, gets off on that.
Yeah.
And that's an amazing, amazing feeling. So yeah, I mean, and the funny thing is, people may or may not understand that, but when you play it, it's essentially DAE, but Tom Capo's, which is this little, I don't have one handy, but that it bars over your fretboard and moves the strings, it moves the tension up a little bit. So it's one up. So
Yeah.
instead of that, it's just one up from that, right?
Yeah.
So you're playing. So it's in F rather than E. If you don't do that, it doesn't sound like you reckon.
No, it doesn't. It's so weird. Yeah.
That's the strangest thing in the world. There are some songs that, like, that's the one thing you have to do because just out of laziness, we used to, because sometimes if you put a capo on, you have to tune and, take a second. And if you usually do You Wreck Me at the end of the song, at the end of the set or whatever, nobody wants to be waiting around for the guitar players to tune. So we would just do it in E and it would be, be okay. And everybody, but something didn't quite feel
Yeah.
right. So we started talking about it. Like, I think we should probably do this with the capos. Like, we should probably do it in the right, and I, we're also in a situation now where I've got actual roadies who can tune things. So that's always nice. But, when you do it the right way and you hit those three chords, the audience knows right away what it is.
Yeah.
They know right away, just like Can't Explain or any of those other songs, what you're playing. It's just amazing. That's an amazing thing.
It is. It's one of those, again, it's one of those indefinable pieces of music. Like there's some songs that have to be in that key. There's some songs that even, as a guitar player, that you can play chords in different positions on the fretboard, but some songs you've got to play them with those voicings, otherwise they don't work. Same with tempo. You don't know
Yeah,
how it feels. If you speed, you don't know how it feels up. It sounds rubbish. It just doesn't, it loses its heart. And so
yeah.
I love and what, yeah, like when those three chords open up, and that's the other thing. How have those three chords never been used exactly that way before? It's like,
Well, they have. I mean, that's the thing. Well, I
well,
was going to
not
say
quite
there's a
exactly that way, right?
there's a song on Rattle and Hum. There's a U2 song, oh, Desire, right?
Yeah.
So Desire, but that's actually in E, not F,
And a wee bit quicker as well.
and a wee bit quicker, wee bit. Um, so, but you're right. I mean, there's something about that particular progression played by those guys
Yeah.
in that way, because the capo creates that jangle. I don't, I can't describe it any other way, that gives it that sort of birdsy slash, whatever it is,
Yeah.
that Heartbreakers thing
Yeah.
that, we all know it when we hear it, but we maybe can't describe it. And I think yeah, it's immediately them, but it's also immediately like, everybody's on their feet and everybody's ready to go. It's just a great, yeah.
Yeah, there's a familiarity to it, right? You just know what it is immediately. And
Yeah.
I was listening to, can't remember whether it's in the Wildflowers documentary or it was like a not subliminal, geez Louise, an additional interview, which I've lost the word there. It begins with S, I can't think what it is. But where Rick Rubin was talking about the song Wildflowers, and he says it sounds like this really simple song. He says, but there are about 30 moments in that song where you don't really necessarily notice unless you really listen that things happen, things change, and things move. And there's some of those in You Wreck Me as well, right? Like I said, that initial whip crack snare hit that Ferroni leads it in, and after that initial rip, then there's the drop in the breakdown where, you get the immortal verse, I'll be the boy in the
And
corduroy
he hits on
pants.
the one instead of on the
And
two.
he hits on the, and it's
very,
just, it's all those little things. And again, it goes back to what we were talking about with Weller and Petty, is that attention to detail. And of course, Rubin comes in, like you said, I mean, seemingly that's a weird fit that you don't think coming off, especially two albums with Jeff Lynne. I
yeah,
don't think Jeff Lynne could have made Wildflowers. He could have done, and it would have sounded, but it would have been so different. Like it just
complete.
wouldn't have worked, So Rubin was just lightning in a bottle, that right guy at that right time to just get all those pieces to line up. It's so good. And then
100%.
and you get the piano coming in late. It comes in on I think of the second verse or after the first chorus. Then you get Benmont. It's just a very simple Benmont, sitting in the background, nailing it down. And so all those little bits, and it does build, even though it just
Yeah.
sounds like you said a straight ahead rocker. It's just, it's a fabulous song. Like you said, it's a lot of fun. And it's on
That's why I
every
chose it.
compilation list. Yeah.
You sent me a list and I'm like, oh, that's a no brainer.
Yeah.
It's a rock and roll classic. And it's like, we take it for granted. That's the thing about, and the words they're funny, but they're so relatable.
Yeah.
They're not throwaway. A lot of those songs that I mentioned earlier, they're also, we think of them as throwaway rock and roll songs, but they're not.
No, they're not. Yeah.
The words are really significant, really important. The entirety of the record. I think that's part of what makes You Wreck Me special, is that, yes, the guitar, and the band playing it, but the words are just so great.
Yeah.
They're simple and they're direct and they're great. And it's sort of everything that Tom and the Heartbreakers as rock and rollers are at, their absolute peak,
Yeah.
is in that. And I guess it's not technically, is Howie on that? I guess it's the Heartbreakers. I can't remember who played bass on that.
Howie plays bass on it. Yeah. It's Howie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's actually the Heartbreakers. Monk too. And so, it's just an amazing thing. I mean, that's like them at their absolute best.
Yeah. And they played it, 500 and odd times. Like it was a mainstay for every single show after that. Because of course you got to play that song, right?
Yeah.
I mean, usually sort of the opening song, the encore.
I mean, it's a song, just as a musician, it is a song people want to hear, and I always, there'll be times when I'll think, oh, we'll do, if we're doing tribute shows or, whatever. And we'll end with American Girl because obviously end with American Girl. But when I choose not to, and I put You Wreck Me there at the end of the set or at the end of the encore, or whatever it is, it slays every time, because A, people don't expect it. And B, people forget at how great it is until when you hear it live, whole experience,
Yeah. Yeah, and I never got to see him live. I wish I had done, but it was the first song of the encore on the 40th anniversary tour, and of course they ended with American Girl. But You Wreck Me in American Girl. Imagine having that as your encore. Like, good Lord. It's almost a cheat code.
It's not, it's like, what? Yeah. I mean, that catalog, we could do a whole other podcast on this catalog. That's all other. Yeah.
Well, awesome. Thanks for talking to me about You Wreck Me, Jeff. I really appreciate you taking some time out. I think, like I said, Wildflowers is a special album for me. I know it is for a lot of other people. So I'm very grateful that all my guests are chipping in and giving me their thoughts on individual songs. So thank you very much. Okay, Pettyheads, that's it for this week. When you're writing a fast rock and roll song, that's one of the most difficult things to do. This is one of the things that Tom tells author Paul Zolo in Conversations with Tom Petty. When Paul asks him to clarify, Tom says, they're really hard to do. It's not where you're drawn to when you're going to write. You tend to find yourself going to the minor chords and going to the slower tempos. But to write an up-tempo rock and roll song and have it work, God, that's a huge payoff. Well, mission accomplished, Tom. The payoff here is phenomenal, and I think it's made all the better by the ingenious place it was sequenced on the album. Track 1, Wildflowers, a song about giving yourself permission to be free, if we take the introspective angle. Track 2, You Don't Know How It Feels, a rallying cry to empathy. Track 3, Time to Move On, an acceptance of what was and what could be. It's a very emotionally dense opening to the album. So, how do you attend to a possibility of thematic stagnation? Well, one of the things you can do is pop in one of the best straight-up rock and roll songs Tom ever wrote, in my opinion, of course. Mike Campbell was, and is, famously prolific in his writing and brought all of that work to Tom just in case there was something there that connected. In this case, Tom saw the truth in those 3 chords and decided to write a masterpiece. It may have taken a while for the final brushstrokes to arrive in Tom's hand, but when they did, they truly transformed a young girl with a faraway look in her eye into the Mona Lisa. Any guesses what I'm scoring this one out of 10? I think Lisa Kelly Pennington has guessed this one already. It's an easy and utterly unshakable 10 out of 10. The Tom Petty Project is a proud member of the Deep Dive Podcast Network. Go check us out on Twitter at DeepDivePodNet. I'm sure you'll find something there you like. I mean it. I say that every week, but I really do. You can also check out my other podcasts, which you might also like. Seaside Pod Review, a Queen podcast that I do with my best pal, Randy Woods. As well as the Ultimate Catalog Clash that I co-host with the hardest working man in podcasting and also one of the nicest fellas you'll ever meet, Corey Morissette. You should also check out this fantastic podcast, which Corey also co-hosts.
What's up, all you rock fans? My name is Mark Kameyer. I'm here representing the quintessential Van Halen podcast, and the podcast will rock. Myself and my co-host Corey Morissette are breaking down the entire Van Halen catalog one track at a time. We spin a wheel, and where it lands, that's the song we talk about. We go into it musically, lyrically, maybe even a behind-the-scenes story. It's all random and it's all fun. It's a show by fans for the fans. Not experts, not rock historians, just simple fans here at the Deep Dive Podcasting Network. We are, and the podcast will rock, and we will rock you later.
Don't forget to follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and YouTube at The Tom Petty Project, and on Twitter at Tom Petty Project. Go follow, like, subscribe, do all those things, and please do leave a rating or review. I've only got about 26 reviews on Apple Music. It would be great to get up to about 35. Go leave a review. It doesn't take long. Keep talking to me on social media, and I'll keep reading out your comments on the show. As a weekly reminder, the Tom Petty Project is not affiliated with the Tom Petty Estate in any way, and when you're looking for Tom's music, please visit official streaming platforms or go to your local independent record seller. Grab some physical media. I'm going to keep saying it. If you're looking for official merchandise, go to tompetty.com. And if you're looking for merch for this show, please go to tompettyproject.com. I got a couple of new designs coming this week, so I'll post those out, but check them out. Don't forget to check out the Tom Petty Nation and Tom Petty Fans Forever groups on Facebook if you're not already a member. And also check out Tom Petty Radio, which is channel 31 on Sirius XM. Until we meet again next week, keep listening to and sharing Tom's music. Try to be kind. Try to say I love you to someone at least once a day. Stay safe and healthy, and I'll be back with you next week to talk about the epic 5th track from Wildflowers, It's Good to Be King. Bye-bye.